What's up, guys? Brady Figueroa coming at you with a review for the new Warbringer album, Wrath and Ruin, released this past Friday, March 14th. It's the 7th album now from this American thrash metal band who has gotten a decent amount of praise and acclaim for kind of being one of those thrash revival bands. Which is interesting because since, honestly, probably the 2000s, thrash metal has been one of those genres that's been on the border between being somewhat innovative still and being kind of just like a legacy subgenre at this point. In a sense that when there's a new thrash metal album, whether it's from a big name legacy band like any of the bands in the Big Four, or a newer band like, I shouldn't say newer because they've been around almost 20 years now, I think over 20 years, but newer band like these guys, the question always comes up, has thrash metal said all it's going to say? I still don't think there is a clear-cut answer to that question, but I will say that Warbringer definitely has been one of the bands that is keeping it alive and keeping it at least new and not old and in the 80s like all of the Big Four bands and their peers do. Now, one thing that I will say I have to compliment this album on, not just in the modern thrash scene, but compared to Warbringer's albums in the past, is that this album definitely has their best and most clear and modern production. Because even if you bring new ideas to the table on a new thrash metal record, if you have like a fuzzed out 80s style thrash production, that is just a one-way ticket to being labeled derivative. But now moments like those like dark, evil, harmonized, sort of Slayer-esque riffs on Strike from the Sky and Jackhammer, also that chunky intro to the album, kicks in at like the 33-second mark on the intro track, Sword in the Cross. Moments like that do sound very modern, even though they are maybe done in a style of one of the more classic thrash bands. So immediately that was very inviting to me, because if it was just a production that sounded straight out of the 80s, I probably wouldn't have even reviewed this album, if I'm being honest. Not because that would make the album bad, I wouldn't be able to get into it as a result. So immediately they get points on the production, but now we have to talk about style and songwriting on here, and address the burning question, which would be, is this album a fresh take on thrash metal? The answer, though, is a little bit complicated, because I would say yes and no kind of at the same time. But let me elaborate. The reason why the no comes into play is because the actual individual thrash ideas on here don't really sound too original. The most blatant example on this album being the track Strike from the Sky. I mean, between just that harmonized riff in the beginning, that shrieky, high belting vocal that leads into the shreddy guitar solo, and the rest of the song follows suit. This song is just about as Slayer as you could possibly get. Not a bad song, just not very innovative. And even aside from the moments on here that do feel a little bit derivative, like there's still, I feel like the individual thrash moments on here that just blatantly channel thrash metal are just the most underwhelming moments on here. Like on the intro track Sword in the Cross, at like the 2:57 mark, this breakdown kicks in that just sounds really, really weak. The rest of the song is solid. Like I already singled out that I like that chunky intro riff, but just when that part kicks in, it really feels like the song just flatlines and loses the energy that the rest of the song built up. The tempo change doesn't really help its case either, although I will say it does pick up a little bit more steam when that solo kicks in, and then the tempo speeds up and it kind of switches gear back into how their song originally sounded. So, I mean, overall, this is still a solid song, just that one part kind of underwhelmed me. However, one element of this album that may work against the whole thrash revival thing, but ends up making this a pretty enjoyable album overall, is the subgenre blending. And the overall reason why one could argue that this is a modern or a fresh take on thrash metal is because Warbringer really does bring together several corners of the extreme metal kind of landscape into this album and blends it with thrash metal. Like, I think track 2, A Better World, although it is predominantly thrash, takes really heavy influence from melodic death metal, just in those harmonized riffs that carry most of the song. The song also fully utilizes those more dirty, harsh vocals rather than the thrashy screams or harsh yelling. That Cage of Air starts with this more like laid-back acoustic section, and then there's another quiet part that comes in about 2/3 of the way through the song, and I feel like this song kind of flexes the band's progressive metal influence. I especially love how that second part kind of transcends and keeps ascending until it ends with this really triumphant finishing section. Those blast beats, when the actual music does kick in into the song, that very much channel just straight up death metal. There's also moments on Jackhammer and Neuromancer that pretty prominently channel death metal as well. And I mean, death metal does come from thrash metal, so it does kind of make sense. And then, without question, my favorite track on this album, Through Glass Darkly, pretty much fully embraces a strong blackened influence. With that doomy intro and that kind of more mid-tempo pace the song has, there's also those, like, ringing guitars that bring in this amazing element of a dark atmosphere, especially in those verses. I fucking love this song. Though it is definitely the biggest departure from straight-up thrash metal on this album, which might just show what my musical tastes are, but they did a great job on this song. So I would definitely say, even though the straight-up thrash sections underwhelmed me a little bit, the subgenre blending and these outside corners of metal all kind of converging here works really well for the band, and as a result, ends up pretty significantly tipping the scales. But just to be clear, I'm not saying all the thrash moments on here underwhelm me. Like, I think The Last of My Kind, which is the final track on here, which very much channels thrash metal over any other metal subgenre, is a pretty killer song. It definitely has some cool dynamics to it with, again, the more laid-back intro, and there's that mood swing that kind of comes in at the end, and the song turns a lot more triumphant. The overall pace of the song is great as well. It feels really, really urgent. It's not too fast to where it just kind of whizzes by, and it's not too slow to where it sounds like underwhelming in that sense. The riffing is very aggressive but also catchy. There's a moment just over the halfway mark where it calms down and the time signature actually changes into more of a triplet feel, and as a result, the song does really feel like it evolves. And you also get some more slightly blackened guitar melodies there, just the way they ring and just the overall dark note choices. This is definitely my favorite of the tracks on here that mostly go for a straight-up thrash sound. And then on the flip side, though, I find the most skippable track on here to be the Jackhammer, track 4. There is that bouncy riff that kicks in like the 144 mark, but I do feel like this track just kind of whizzes by without a whole lot of memorability. It's just over 3 minutes long, and aside from that bouncy riff I just mentioned, riff-wise there isn't a whole lot going on in this song, I feel like. I don't think this song's bad, it just underwhelmed me the most, to put it frankly. There are also just a few things that I think the band could have incorporated a little bit more to make this album sound a bit more of like a fresh take on thrash. And one of the main components here would be the utilization of guitar solos. Because obviously lead guitar and guitar solos play a very important role in thrash metal. But I find that the majority of the solos on this album kind of just take too much blatant influence from the Kerry Kings and the Kirk Hammetts, in a sense that they're kind of just wailing on the fretboard. Now, in the lead guitar's defense, I do think it might not necessarily just be because of the solos. It might just be because of the overall feel of the song not having like a strong emotion to it. Because if the purpose of these more thrash-influenced songs are just to be aggressive, then that style might work. But for my taste, I like when guitar solos are a bit more well thought out. And I like when they contribute more to the song rather than just to sound and be flashy, to put it frankly again. And there are examples on this album that the band can do it, like on Through Glass Darkly, like I said. That guitar solo I do think really fits the mood of the song. Same with Cage of Air, the one that kicks in just over halfway through, because that solo sounds a little bit exotic and is a bit more dramatic sounding, which also fits the mood of that song. Or I also think the band could have maybe went in more of like a progressive direction with this album. Maybe incorporate a few more odd time signatures. Maybe use some unconventional instrumentation at parts. Sure, these are just ideas I'm coming up with to fit my tastes, but this is my review. As far as any closing overall thoughts, I will say that I do like the band's emphasis on making thrash just a bit more extreme sounding. That aspect, along with the production, like I mentioned earlier, do together make the album sound a lot more fresh. And I also like the arrangement of the album. I think the fact that it's just 8 songs makes it a lot more replayable. Like, when I do these reviews, I listen to these albums over and over and over again so I could be as detailed as I can. And with this album, it was very easy to just hit replay as soon as the album was over. And something else that contributed to that well was just the tracks being so different from each other, but overall still fitting under what's mostly a thrash metal umbrella. So, I mean, overall, while I may not fully be on the thrash metal revival bandwagon for these guys, this was still a pretty solid album. So as a result, I'm going to score this album a 21 out of 30. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you have heard this album, definitely comment your thoughts on it below. I'd love to hear them. Please hit the subscribe button for more rock and metal-related content and album reviews, discography rankings, track reviews, whatever. I got my Instagram, Spotify, and Threads links in the description of the video. And until next time, once again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.